Unlike a video game, your reader doesn't enter your fantasy novel at level 1. They start at 0. It's your job to get them from level 0 to level 1. And I want to show you why you don't have 20 pages in which to do that. You don't have 10. You don't even have 2 pages. You have 1 page. Because here's the problem a lot of fantasy writers face. They spend weeks or months or maybe even years designing a fantasy world, making histories or cultures or maps. But at some point, you have to put your world onto the page. So I want to show you how to do exactly that, how to build your fantasy world line by line, brick by brick on the page itself. And in order to do that, I want to take a 240,000 word fantasy novel, and I want to show you how it manages to convey a fresh and compelling world in just the first 193 words. Now, the book is called The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is one of my favorite fantasy reads of the last few years. So let's jump in. Now, the book technically opens with a brief memory. It's actually exactly 100 words long, but I'm not going to analyze it here because it doesn't affect the world building, and it's not really part of the first scene anyway, but I did want to put it on the screen for context in case you want to read it. So let's jump into the first scene. I know I'm always telling you to think before you act, says the craggy-faced man slouching across the board from me. But for the game to progress this, you do actually have to move a goddamn stone. I rip my preoccupied gaze from the cold silver that's streaming through the soul-barred window in the guard room. Give my opponent my best irritated glare to cover the sickly swell of memory, then force my focus again to the polished white and red triangles between us. The pieces glint dully in the light of the low-burning lantern that sits on the shelf, barely illuminating our contest better than the early evening's glow from outside. You all right? Fine. I see Hrolf's bushy gray eyebrows twitch in the corner of my vision. I'm fine, old man, just thinking. Sappers haven't gotten me yet. No heat to the words. I know the way his faded brown eyes crinkle with concern is genuine, and I know he has to ask. I've been working here almost a year longer than him, so he's wondering again whether my mind is losing its edge, like his has been for a while now. Now, if we look at just the first 2 paragraphs here, which comes out to 112 words, it's not a very flashy opening. 2 players playing a game that's essentially chess, and one of them takes so long to move that the other player eventually gets upset. I would argue it's actually kind of a familiar scene.
If you don't move soon, I'm going to start decomposing.
Beyond this, we don't actually learn a lot about the world. We know that it's early evening, we know that they're playing a board game, and we know that they're in a guard room. However, as soon as we get past the first 2 paragraphs, we start to see a lot of nuances at play. We know that Viss is not taking a long time to move because he's thinking. He's taking a long time because he's distracted. He's lost in memory, the memory that we referenced earlier, but Hrolf mistakes this for something else, that Viss is losing his mind. Think about that for a moment. Imagine you're playing a game of chess, and you take a little bit too long to move, and your opponent looks at you and says, "Hey, are you getting stupider right now?" But this is exactly what Hrolf does. And notice how he does it. He doesn't come right out and say exactly what he means. He phrases it as, "You all right?" And when Viss answers that he's fine, Hrolf gives him a look that says, "No, I need the truth." So I want to look under the surface and see what's happening, because the surface is just a simple question and response. This is something Hrolf feels comfortable asking indirectly, but he doesn't feel comfortable enough to say it outright. At the same time, he feels entitled to the answer, but also at the same time, he doesn't want to be rude about it. And what's interesting about this nuance is that this is just Hrolf's side of the equation. Because when it comes to Viss has none of Hrolf's squeamishness. He comes right out and says, "Sappers haven't got me yet." Now, this doesn't have complete meaning for us yet, but it is clear that Viss is answering Hrolf's unspoken question with a confident spoken response. It's clear that Viss understands the subtext here, but he just chooses to bulldoze right through it. It's an illumination of character and world at the same time, or perhaps more accurately, it's an illumination of the world through character. Now, I want to look at Viss's final thought here in this section. I've been working here almost a year longer than him, so he's wondering again whether my mind is losing its edge, like his has been for a while now. Well, that's weird. Wherever they're working, it's apparently someplace where you can slowly lose your mind. This sounds like, one, the worst security job ever, but two, they're also clearly in a dangerous place. But notice again that this form of danger actually affects the mind. It's not simply a physical danger. It's a threat to the power of your ability to think. And Viss's final thought about Hrolf's mind here, like his has been for a while now, implies that Viss's own mind isn't actually having problems, but that he knows Hrolf's mind is. So if we stop and think about this for a moment, Hrolf knows that they're in a place that poses a threat to the mind. So he thinks that the place is potentially damaging Viss's mind. On the flip side, Viss knows this is not occurring to him, but he also knows that Hrolf thinks it might be. And on top of all of that, Viss knows that Hrolf's mind is being damaged by wherever and whatever is there. Now, I want to pause for a moment and look at everything that we've learned about this world so far, because this is not an action-packed world where characters are constantly in physical conflict. This is a world of subtlety. We don't know everything about that world, of course, but we do know a few things. We know that it's dangerous, right? There's the mind deterioration, whatever is causing that. We know that there are strict social codes. This is Hrolf's indirect question. We know that intelligence matters. There's strategic thinking and mental sharpness. And we also know that our point of view character here, Viss, rejects some of these social niceties and these social codes. So now the question is, how did we build all of that? We've seen what's been happening on the surface, and we've seen what's been happening underneath the surface, but how do we do that? How do we replicate that? Because one misconception that I see all the time in my writing clients and my former students is that they think that building a fantasy world is their job. They think that the way to build a fantasy world is to go design a magic system, create maps, create cultures and histories, and then present all of that information to the reader. But that's not actually how it works. The real way it works is that your reader builds the world in their own head. It's actually the reader's job to build the world. It's your job to tell a story. The reader, if you're doing your job well, is actually building the world simultaneously in their head as they read the story. And this is not just semantics. This has real implications if you're trying to get someone to build a world in their head. Because when we build worlds as writers, we tend to do it from the ground up. We build our magic systems, we build our cultures, our histories, all these things, we kind of flesh them out layer by layer. But there are two problems with this approach. One is that it's boring. Your reader doesn't want to build the world from the ground up. They don't want to sketch the world in the same way that you sketched the world and then fleshed it out. They want the world to already exist right from the get-go. And the second problem is that it's unrealistic. Our world doesn't feel that way. That's not how we actually experience a world at all. You don't just know everything. There are uncertainties, there's mysteries all over. The reason we travel is to discover new things, new places that we didn't even know existed before. We have our own myths and legends and histories, and these things kind of pop up from all these different angles. The world doesn't exist in layers. We don't experience the world in layers. And so when your reader comes to your story, they don't want to read everything there is to know about your magic system and then move on to everything there is to know about the cultures that you have, and then the languages, and then so on. That's boring, and it's unrealistic. It doesn't feel real, and most importantly, it doesn't feel like a story. So the key question as a writer is, how does the reader build this world? Because if we can answer that question, we can start to think about how we might allow the reader to build the world for themselves. And the answer is that we as readers draw inferences. We're constantly trying to see under the surface of things, constantly trying to see the implications of things that happen. Never underestimate the sophistication that is reading words. Think about how much information that you soak in as a reader every time you read. And we're not just trusting that the reader will do this. We're relying on them doing this. We know they're going to look under the surface. One example here would be Hrolf's indirect question and Viss's direct response. From this, we can infer that there is social pressure with how you present yourself to the world. Hrolf doesn't just come out and ask Viss something point blank. He couches it in an indirect question. And even though Hrolf is technically Viss's superior, he doesn't treat Viss like an inferior, even though he demands an answer. There's room within this social hierarchy for play. Viss can respond in a way that sort of rejects this social pressure. So when we put enough of these inferences together, the mind deterioration, the social subtlety, or the strategic thinking as survival, they coalesce into a fragment. They allow us to make a small judgment about the world that feels intelligible. And this particular fragment might be, this is a world where your intellect has the power to determine your fate. This information alone is not everything about the world. It doesn't tell us what's going to happen in the future. It doesn't necessarily give us anything concrete, but it is complete enough information the author can play with this now. So the inferences that we've drawn so far, such as this is a world of subtlety over action, or this is a world with this rigid social hierarchy, these things don't tell us everything about the world, but they do allow us to consider what might happen moving forward. And now that we have these things established, we can see how the author might play with these things. Also note that this is why writers can start writing a fantasy book without knowing everything about their world beforehand, because you can essentially read your own work as you write it. You can make these inferences the same way that a reader would as you write your scenes. This is why a lot of the advice out there says you don't need to have everything figured out about your world before you start writing. And as a matter of fact, you probably shouldn't have everything figured out. The time you spend figuring everything out before you actually start writing usually turns out to hurt you more than it helps you, because you spend too much time trying to make things perfect before you actually get words onto the page. And what the reader cares about is the words on the page. So what's an actionable step that you can take and apply to your own writing now that you understand this principle? Give your readers inference-rich fragments, not explanations. Don't explain your world to the reader. Give them things that allow them to draw inferences. So for example, in this story, the story doesn't stop and say, this world has a mind-deteriorating substance. Rather, we see Viss say something kind of almost offhand, sappers haven't got me yet, and we see the interaction between Hrolf and Viss, and we kind of draw the conclusion that there's some sort of danger here, even if we can't yet know exactly what it is. Another example, instead of saying this is a world with a rigid social hierarchy, instead, we just see two characters interacting and what they can and can't say to one another and what they choose and choose not to say. We infer the social structure. So let's look at some of the fragments we might have created so far. We have two people playing a game of strategy. So notice that this is something where there's action on the surface, but most of the action is happening in the mind. We know that they're in a guard room, but we don't get much more than this. Their dialogue is nuanced. Once again, most of the action is happening underneath the dialogue. They don't say everything that they mean to say. So once again, this is an example where things don't necessarily happen on the surface. They happen underneath the surface. Even within this social hierarchy, there's nuance. Viss, for example, seems willing to directly confront that hierarchy in some form. We know that wherever they are is dangerous, and that once again, this danger is mainly a danger to the mind. All of these things we built ourselves as we read the piece, and it didn't take a long time. We have all of these fragments from 193 words, less than 200 words, and we now have a sense of this world. And note that the story is not building this. We are building the world. We are drawing these inferences from the story. And note how many of these fragments are congruent with one another. So many of them are about a kind of rigid surface up top, but then a lot of subtext, a lot of play underneath that surface. And again, we build all of this in 193 words. You don't have 20 pages, but the good news is you don't need 20 pages. You don't need 10 or 2. You can start giving your reader tools to build the world right from the beginning of the story. And as a matter of fact, your reader expects it and hopes for it. They want to start building the world. So if readers building fragments is what happens, the next question is, how does that happen? How do we help the reader draw inferences? Or how do we control what the inferences might be? The good news is that it's actually a relatively simple principle, if sometimes it can be hard to put into practice. And the short answer is this. you create a point of view character who is navigating their world. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about how creating that point of view character serves as the foundation of your fantasy world. And if you're wondering who I am, my name's Alex. I'm an editor and book coach, and I help writers improve their writing and their writing process. If you're interested, there's more information down below. If you want to see how to build on top of the layers we've just established here and how to play with what you've set up, check out my next video.